The air had a certain kind of clean feel to it, the kind you only get right next to the ocean. It was cool against his face, carrying the salty smell of the sea and the faint, sweet scent of wildflowers growing on the cliffs beside the highway. For him, this was freedom. It wasn't about escaping from anything, not really. It was more about riding towards a feeling of peace, a quiet hum that settled deep inside him, when the world was reduced to the rumble of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. The motorcycle felt like an extension of himself, a part of him that understood the language of the road without needing any words. He wasn't a movie star out here. He wasn't a face on a poster or a character in a script. He was just a man on a bike, watching the California sun dip lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. People often wondered why someone like him would choose such a simple, solitary life. They saw the fame, the money, the red carpets, and they couldn't understand why he'd be content to just ride, to grab a simple coffee, to live so quietly. But they didn't see the other side of it. They didn't feel the weight of all those eyes, the constant hum of expectation that followed him everywhere he went. Out here, on his bike, there was only the wind and his own thoughts. And his thoughts lately had been drifting back, as they often did, to the people he had lost. It wasn't a sharp, stabbing pain anymore, not like it used to be. It was more like a dull, constant ache, a background noise to his life that had become a part of who he was. A familiar sadness. He'd see a little girl laughing with her father in a park, and for a split second, a ghost of a memory would flash in his mind, so vivid it would almost take his breath away. He'd shake it off, of course. He had to. But the feeling would linger, a reminder of a happiness that once was. And a love that never really left. He pulled into a small, nondescript cafe off the main road. A place he liked because no one really seemed to recognize him. Or if they did, they were cool enough not to make a big deal about it. The bell above the door chimed softly as he walked in, his helmet tucked under his arm. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled, a genuine, easy smile that didn't falter when she saw his face. "The usual?" she asked. He nodded. "The usual." It was nice to have a usual. It was nice to be a regular somewhere, to have that small sense of belonging in a world that often felt like he was just passing through. He paid for his coffee, left a generous tip on the counter, and found a small table in the corner, by the window. As he sipped the hot, dark liquid, he watched the world go by. A couple arguing over a map, a group of friends laughing loudly, an old man reading a newspaper, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Each of them with their own story, their own joys and sorrows. He felt a sense of connection to them, a silent understanding that they were all just trying to navigate this crazy, beautiful, and sometimes heartbreaking thing called life. Finishing his coffee, he gave a small nod to the woman behind the counter and stepped back out into the fading light. The air was getting colder now, the sun almost gone. He pulled on his helmet, the world suddenly becoming muffled and distant, and swung his leg back over the bike. The engine roared to life with a satisfying growl, and he pulled back onto the highway, feeling the familiar rush of freedom as he picked up speed. The headlights cut through the twilight, illuminating the road ahead. It was a clear night, the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He felt a sense of calm, a quiet contentment. These moments were precious. They were the moments that kept him grounded, that reminded him of what was real. He was so lost in the feeling of the ride, in the rhythm of the engine and the blur of the scenery, that he almost didn't see it. It happened so fast. A pair of headlights suddenly swerving into his lane. A car, coming from the opposite direction, had lost control. There was no time to think, no time to react. He just saw the blinding glare of the headlights getting closer and closer, and then a deafening screech of tires that tore through the night. The last thing he remembered was the violent, sickening crunch of metal, and the feeling of being thrown through the air, weightless for a brief, terrifying moment before the world came crashing down around him. He hit the ground hard. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot fire that seemed to consume every inch of his body. He could feel the rough, abrasive texture of the asphalt against his skin, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. He tried to move, to cry out, but he couldn't. His body wouldn't obey. He could hear voices, distant and panicked, but they sounded like they were underwater, muffled and distorted. The world around him began to fade, the sharp edges of reality blurring into a swirl of color and light. The pain, which had been so intense just moments before, started to recede, replaced by a strange and profound sense of peace. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, a deep, all-encompassing quiet that settled over him like a warm blanket. He felt himself letting go, not out of fear or despair, but out of a strange and sudden curiosity. He felt a pull, a gentle but irresistible force drawing him away from the broken body on the side of the road, away from the chaos and the pain and towards something else. Something he couldn't see, but could feel with every fiber of his being. A presence. A silence that was louder than any sound. He was no longer on the highway. He was nowhere, and yet he was everywhere. The physical world was gone, and in its place was a vast, infinite emptiness that was somehow more full and more real than anything he had ever known. The transition was not like waking from a dream. It was the opposite. It was like waking into the real world for the very first time. The chaos of the crash, the screeching tires, the shattering metal, it all faded into a distant echo, a memory belonging to someone else. The searing pain in his body vanished completely. There was no up or down, no left or right. He was simply existing, suspended in a quiet so profound it felt like a physical substance, a warm, gentle weight that held him. He tried to open his eyes, but he realized he didn't have eyes anymore. He tried to take a breath, but he had no lungs. There was only his consciousness, pure and unburdened, floating in an endless soft darkness that was not empty at all. It was full of potential, full of peace, full of a feeling so immense it was almost too much to comprehend. Love. Not the simple love between people, but a love that was the very fabric of this place. The air he was breathing, the ground he was standing on. Even though there was no air and no ground, and then he felt a presence. It wasn't a person or a being in the way he understood it. There was no figure, no face, no form. It was more like a shift in the atmosphere, a current of awareness that flowed through and around him. It was ancient, older than the stars, and it knew him completely. It knew every thought he had ever had, every secret he had ever kept, every joy and every sorrow. And yet there was no judgment in this knowing. There was only a deep, abiding sadness, a sorrow so vast and gentle it felt like the ocean. This presence began to communicate with him, not with words that are heard, but with understandings that are felt. It was like a direct download of pure truth into his soul. The first truth settled into him with the weight of a mountain. It was the answer to a question he never knew he was asking. What is the one thing that causes the most pain, not just to humans, but to the very heart of existence? The answer came not as a word, but as a feeling and a flood of images. The feeling was a cold, sharp chill. The images were of everyday life. He saw a young woman walking down a busy city street, her arms full of groceries. A bag ripped and an orange rolled towards the feet of a man in an expensive suit who was typing furiously on his phone. He saw the orange bump against his polished shoe. He saw the man look down, see the orange, see the woman struggling, and then, with a flicker of annoyance, simply step over it and continue walking, never breaking his stride. The vision zoomed in, and he could feel what the man felt, a brief, momentary irritation that his rhythm had been disturbed, followed by a complete and total dismissal. He could also feel what the woman felt, a small, sharp pang of embarrassment and loneliness, a feeling of being invisible. The presence let him feel both sensations at once. The coldness of the man's indifference was a physical thing, a tiny dark cloud that seeped from him and dissipated into the air, leaving a faint, lingering stain. The woman's loneliness was a small, flickering light that dimmed for just a moment. The vision shifted. He was in a crowded subway car. An elderly man was standing, swaying with the motion of the train, his face etched with exhaustion. Around him, people sat, their eyes glued to their phones, their faces illuminated by the cold blue light. They saw him. Of course they saw him, but a collective, unspoken decision hung in the air. Someone else will give up their seat. It's not my turn. I'm too tired. The presence showed him the invisible threads of connection that should have linked all these people together, threads of empathy, of shared humanity. And he watched as, one by one, people chose to sever those threads. They didn't do it out of malice. They did it out of apathy. It was a choice, a conscious turning away from a simple opportunity to care. And with each choice, the collective energy in the subway car grew colder, dimmer. The old man's weariness was not just physical. It was a spiritual burden, made heavier by the weight of all those averted eyes. The scale of the visions began to expand. He saw images on television screens, reports of a famine in a distant land. He saw families huddled in makeshift shelters, their eyes hollow with hunger. He saw the images flicker in living rooms across the world. He watched as a family ate their dinner, the news playing quietly in the background. He saw the father look at the screen, a flicker of pity crossing his face. That's a shame, he might have thought. But then his son asked to pass the salt, and the moment was gone. The image of the starving family was replaced by the immediate, mundane reality of his own life. The presence showed him this happening in millions of homes, a million tiny moments of compassion that were acknowledged and then instantly discarded. The sorrow he felt from the presence was overwhelming. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, cosmic heartbreak. It was the pain of a parent watching their children deliberately hurt one another by simply refusing to care. He began to understand. This indifference, this apathy, it wasn't a small thing. It was the root of all other pain. Where there is apathy, cruelty can grow unchecked. Where there is indifference, suffering is allowed to flourish. It was the original sin, not because of a divine rule, but because of its simple, devastating logic. To be indifferent is to deny the fundamental truth that we are all connected. It is to look at another soul and say, your pain is not my pain. Your joy is not my joy. You are not me. It is the act of spiritually severing the tie that binds all of creation together. The presence showed him the universe as a vast, intricate, and beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of every soul. Every act of love, every moment of compassion tightened the weave and made the colors more vibrant. Every act of indifference was a single, pulled thread, creating a small, ugly snag that weakened the entire design. Then the most difficult part began. The presence turned its gentle but unflinching gaze upon his own life. He was shown moments not of great evil, but of small, missed opportunities. He saw himself on a film set years ago. A young crew member was struggling with a heavy piece of equipment, their face red with effort. He remembered that day. He had been deep in thought about a scene, focusing on his lines, his own world. He had walked right past the struggling person, offering only a fleeting, distracted glance. In the memory, he had barely registered it. Now, seeing it through the eyes of this presence, he felt the crew members' quiet desperation and their flicker of hope as they saw him approach, followed by their sharp sting of disappointment when he ignored them. He felt the coldness of his own indifference in that moment, and it was a painful, bitter taste. He saw another memory. He was leaving a restaurant, and a fan had hesitantly approached him, asking for a photo. He remembered being tired, not wanting the attention. He had given a quick, dismissive, "Not today, man," and walked on. At the time, he had justified it. He was entitled to his privacy. But now, he felt the fan's simple, genuine admiration turn into a small, sharp feeling of rejection. He saw how his moment of selfishness had cast a tiny shadow over their day. The presence was not accusing him. It was simply showing him the truth, the ripple effect of his own choices. He saw dozens of these moments, a lifetime of small, unthinking acts of apathy. They weren't monstrous, but they added up. He understood now that it wasn't about grand gestures of charity, though those were good. It was about the small, constant, moment-to-moment choice to see the other person, to acknowledge their humanity, to care. The weight of this realization was immense, a crushing, humbling force that broke down something inside him, leaving him feeling raw, exposed, and profoundly, humbly sorry. It was a sorrow that purified him, burning away the ego and leaving behind only a clear, simple understanding. The truth was not a list of rules. It was a single, devastatingly simple principle. We are all one, and the worst thing we can do is pretend we are not. The weight of the first truth settled in him, a heavy, humbling sorrow. He saw the countless tiny moments of indifference in his own life, not as sins, but as missed opportunities, as small, sad failures to connect. The presence around him didn't judge him for it. Instead, it enveloped his regret with a wave of understanding so profound it felt like a forgiveness he hadn't even known he needed. It was a quiet acknowledgement that this was the human condition, this constant, subtle temptation to look away. But just as he was beginning to drown in the sheer scale of this collective apathy, the presence shifted. The sorrowful energy softened, transforming into something else, a current of anticipation. There was more. A deeper layer to the same truth. The second revelation began not with a vision of the world, but with a feeling. It was the feeling of being stuck. He was suddenly in the body of a young woman sitting in a small, neat apartment. She was holding a guitar, her fingers poised over the strings. He could feel the music inside her, a beautiful, complex melody that was practically bursting to get out. It was a song full of hope and longing, a song that could make strangers weep with its beauty. But as her fingers touched the strings, a wave of cold fear washed over him. He felt her thoughts. What if they don't like it? What if it's not good enough? What if I'm a fool for even trying? The fear was a physical thing, a cage around her heart. Her hands froze. The music remained trapped inside her, a vibrant, living light suffocating in the darkness of her fear. The presence showed him what this looked like from the outside. To the world, she was just a quiet woman. But in this spiritual realm, he could see the brilliant, glowing energy of her gift building up inside her with nowhere to go. It was creating a pressure, a spiritual stagnation. The light was beginning to dim, not because it was gone, but because it was being hoarded, locked away by the key of fear. The scene shifted again. He was now in the body of an old man, sitting alone in a workshop filled with beautiful, intricate woodwork. Shavings of cedar and pine littered the floor. On a bench sat a half-finished toy boat, a masterpiece of craftsmanship. He could feel the man's deep well of knowledge, his decades of experience, his unique ability to bring life to a block of wood. This was his gift, his light. But the man was lonely. His children and grandchildren lived far away, always too busy with their own lives. He had tried to teach his grandson once, but the boy had been more interested in his video games. The old man had felt a pang of rejection, and he had put his tools away. The presence showed him the man's thoughts. They don't care. Why should I bother? It's just a waste of time. He was hoarding his wisdom, his time, his craft. The presence let him feel the consequence. The old man's workshop, which should have been a place of vibrant creation, felt like a museum. The energy was stale. The light of his talent was still there, but it was a lonely, flickering candle instead of a roaring fire. And out in the world, his family felt a vague, unidentifiable emptiness in their lives, not realizing they were starving for the very connection and wisdom he was withholding. He began to see the pattern. The presence showed him a businessman who was brilliant at creating opportunities but kept all the profits for himself, terrified of not having enough. He saw a woman who had a wonderful, infectious laugh but suppressed it, believing it was unladylike. He saw a young man full of brilliant ideas for a community project but never shared them, fearing they would be shot down and he would look foolish. In every case, the root was the same: fear. Fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of vulnerability. And in every case, the result was the same: a spiritual swamp. The divine energy, the light that was meant to flow through them and out into the world, was getting dammed up. It was creating a pool of stagnant energy around them, leading to misery, bitterness, and a slow dimming of their own inner light. Then, the presence gave him the mind-blowing connection, the core principle that tied it all together. It wasn't just about being nice or generous. It was a fundamental law of the universe, like gravity. Every talent, every moment of joy, every bit of resources, every ounce of love, it was not a possession to be owned. It was a current of divine energy, a river meant to flow through a person and out into the world. You were not meant to be a reservoir, hoarding the water for yourself. You were meant to be a channel, a conduit. To try to dam it up, to hold it tight out of fear, was to go against the very nature of your existence. It was the spiritual equivalent of trying to hold your breath forever. The result wasn't strength. It was suffocation. The presence showed him what happened when the flow was allowed. When the woman with the guitar finally played her song, even if just for one person, the light burst out of her and it didn't diminish her. It made her brighter. It lit up the person who heard it, who then felt inspired to create something of their own. The flow created more flow. It was the source of all abundance, all joy, all connection. Finally, the presence turned this profound understanding onto his own life. It showed him a memory from a film set years ago. He had learned that a beloved actor, a friend, might not be cast in a movie because of budget constraints. He remembered the feeling in his gut, the simple, clear thought that this was wrong. He had gone to the producers and offered to take a pay cut from his own salary to make it happen. At the time, it just felt like the right thing to do, a practical solution to a human problem. But now, seeing it through this new lens, he understood. He had recognized a blockage in the flow of opportunity and abundance. He had used his own resources to clear the blockage, to let the river flow. He hadn't been hoarding his light. He had been sharing it. He saw another memory. He was on location, a grueling, months-long shoot. Instead of retreating to his trailer, he made a point to eat with the crew, to learn their names, to listen to their stories. He shared his time, his attention, his status. He wasn't hoarding his position as the star. He was letting the light of connection flow freely from him to them and back again. He saw his simple lifestyle, his lack of interest in fancy cars or huge mansions. He realized now that he had never been trying to accumulate possessions. He had always intuitively understood that stuff could be a dam. It could weigh you down, make you afraid of losing it, and stop the flow. He had been unconsciously living in alignment with this universal law his entire life, not out of a sense of religious duty, but because it just felt right. It felt like freedom. The realization was staggering. The sorrow from the first revelation was still there, a deep ache for all the disconnection in the world. But now it was balanced by a powerful, electrifying sense of clarity. His life, with all its random acts of kindness and its quiet, humble nature, suddenly had a profound, cosmic purpose. He wasn't just a man trying to be good. He was a conduit, a channel, participating in the great, flowing river of life. He understood now why giving felt so much better than receiving. It wasn't a moral paradox. It was spiritual physics. This truth didn't just blow his mind. It recalibrated his entire soul. He was no longer just a man who had died in a crash. He was a student who had been given the answer key to the universe. The return was not a gentle fading in. It was a violent, jarring crash. One moment, he was floating in the infinite, loving wisdom of the presence, understanding the very fabric of the universe. The next, a sharp, insistent beeping drilled into his consciousness. It was an ugly, mechanical sound in a place of perfect silence. Then came the smells, an assault on the senses. The sterile, chemical scent of antiseptic, the faint, unpleasant smell of sickness, the recycled air of a closed room. It was all so harsh, so crude. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt like they were sealed with lead. He tried to move, but a white-hot explosion of pain erupted from his leg and his side, anchoring him brutally to the physical world. The peace was gone. The weightlessness was gone. All that was left was pain and noise and the suffocating confines of a body that felt broken and alien. A blurry figure leaned over him, a face swimming in and out of focus. A voice, professional and a little tired, was speaking words that made no sense. Multiple fractures. Internal bleeding. Lucky to be alive. The words were just sounds like the clattering of a distant train. They had no meaning. The real world, the true world, was the one he had just left. This hospital room felt like a flimsy movie set, a poorly constructed illusion. He wanted to go back. He yearned for the all-encompassing love and the profound, silent understanding of the presence. But he couldn't. He was trapped here, in this shell of pain, under these harsh fluorescent lights. He managed to force his eyes open a slit. The world was a blur of white and beige. A tube was taped to his arm, a clear liquid dripping slowly into his vein. He was a machine, being kept alive by other machines. The contrast was so devastating it made his soul ache. Days, or maybe weeks, blurred into one another. Time had lost its linear hold on him. He drifted in and out of consciousness, floating between the reality of the hospital bed and the echoes of the other realm. When he was awake, he was mostly silent. Nurses and doctors would come and go, checking his vitals, adjusting his medications, speaking to him in calm, reassuring tones. They saw a famous actor, a trauma patient, recovering from a terrible accident. They saw the quiet, stoic man they had read about in magazines. But he was no longer that man. He was something else entirely. He was a vessel carrying a truth so immense it threatened to shatter him. This was the burden. It wasn't the physical pain, which was constant and sometimes overwhelming. It was the weight of the knowledge. He had seen the source code of creation, understood the two great laws of spiritual existence, the soul-crushing nature of indifference, and the liberating power of flow. And he could tell no one who would believe him? He could imagine the conversation. I had a near-death experience, and God told me that the worst sin is not caring and that we're supposed to be like rivers, not reservoirs. They would nod slowly, exchange concerned glances, and maybe increase the dosage of his pain medication. They would think the accident had damaged his brain. The truth was not a story to be told. It was a reality to be lived. It was a secret that burned inside him, a sacred and heavy responsibility. He felt profoundly alone, more isolated than he had ever felt on a motorcycle on a deserted road. He was surrounded by people, yet he was the only one who knew the world was not what it seemed. This secret, however, began to change him in subtle but profound ways. His interactions were no longer just polite. They were intentional. A young nurse, looking exhausted and stressed, came in to change his bandages. Her hands were a little shaky, her movements rushed. In the past, he might have just lay there quietly, trying to be a good patient. But now he saw her differently. He saw the light of her own spirit dimmed by fatigue and worry. He saw the fear that she might make a mistake, the weight of her responsibilities. So he looked her directly in the eyes. "Thank you for what you do," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "I know it's not easy." The nurse stopped, surprised. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. A small, tired smile touched her lips. "It's my job," she said, but her tone had softened. In that small exchange, he had not just been polite. He had chosen to fight against indifference. He had seen her, acknowledged her humanity, and in doing so had allowed a tiny current of light to flow between them. He felt it, a small spark of warmth in the cold sterility of the room. He began to apply the second truth, the law of flow, to his own life. Lying in that bed, unable to move, he had a lot of time to think. He thought about his money, his fame, his career. Before, they were just things he had accumulated, tools for his own comfort and security. Now he saw them for what they were, a massive dam. A reservoir of energy that was meant to be flowing out into the world. He made a decision. He would not hoard it. He started thinking about the people on his film sets, the crew members who worked long hours for less pay. He thought about charities that were trying to build wells in villages, trying to give children an education, trying to cure diseases. He saw these not as causes for donation, but as channels. He could use his resources to clear blockages, to help the river of abundance and opportunity flow where it was needed most. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about his spiritual physics. To dam up the flow was to suffocate his own soul. To release it was to breathe. His physical recovery was slow and painful. Each physical therapy session was a battle. But with each small victory taking his first step, Lifting his arm without wincing, he felt a parallel strengthening of his new purpose. The pain was a constant reminder of the price of his knowledge, a bridge between the two worlds he now inhabited. He was no longer just Keanu Reeves, the actor. He was a student of the universe, tasked with living out a final exam he hadn't known he was taking. He didn't need to preach from a mountaintop. His life would be his sermon. His kindness would be his scripture. His generosity would be his prayer. He carried the truth with him, not as a heavy stone, but as a quiet, steady flame in his chest, a light to guide his every step from this day forward. He was being discharged, and as he signed the papers, he knew he was not just leaving a hospital. He was being reborn into the world, with a mission that was both terrifying and beautiful, to simply live the truth, and in doing so, to help others remember it too. Years passed. The accident became a footnote in his long career, a dramatic chapter that most people had forgotten. But for him, it was the line that separated his old life from his new one. He continued to make movies, to ride his motorcycle, to live a life that, on the surface, looked much the same. But anyone who paid close attention could feel the shift. A young journalist was assigned to write a profile piece, where is he now kind of story. The journalist, like most people, expected the usual narrative. The tragic, lonely hero, the internet's boyfriend, the sad, beautiful man who had been through so much. But the more time he spent on the film set, observing, the more he realized the story everyone thought they knew was wrong. He saw it first during a scene with a younger actor, someone new to the big leagues. The young man was struggling with a particularly emotional line. He kept flubbing it, his frustration growing with each take. The director was getting impatient, the crew was getting restless, and the pressure on the young actor was immense. He was freezing up, the fear of failure a palpable wall around him. The journalist watched the famous actor walk over, not with the air of a megastar giving advice, but with the quiet calm of a friend. He didn't say anything about the script or the acting. He just put a hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Hey, it's okay. Forget about the camera. Forget about all of us. Just look at her. What do you want to say to her right now from your heart?" He stood there for a moment, a solid, reassuring presence, creating a small bubble of safety in the middle of the chaotic set. The young actor took a deep breath, nodded, and when they rolled the camera again, the line came out perfectly, filled with a raw, authentic emotion that stunned everyone into silence. The journalist scribbled in his notebook. It wasn't just kindness. It was something more deliberate, more intentional. It was as if he knew exactly how to dismantle the young man's fear later. The journalist did his research, digging into the actor's charitable work. He expected to find the usual foundations with his name on them, the standard celebrity philanthropy. But what he found was different. There were anonymous donations to arts programs in inner-city schools, programs that gave kids who had nothing a chance to paint, to play music, to dance. There was funding for a small nonprofit that built community gardens in forgotten neighborhoods, places where people could grow food together and break down the walls of isolation. He discovered he had quietly set up a trust to pay for the college, education of the children of a crew member who had died unexpectedly years ago. None of this was done for publicity. There were no press releases, no galas, no buildings with his name on them. It was a quiet, consistent, and almost invisible flow of resources, all aimed at the same thing, giving people a chance to let their own light shine, to break free from the fear and the apathy that held them down. He wasn't just giving money. He was investing in flow. One evening, the journalist was looking through old photos online, and he came across the famous sad Keanu meme, the one of him sitting on a park bench, looking lost in thought. For years, the world had projected its own ideas onto that image: loneliness, depression, heartbreak. But looking at it now, after what he had seen, the journalist saw something else. He didn't see a man sad for himself. He saw a man who was carrying the weight of the world's sorrow. It wasn't the sadness of a victim. It was the profound, deep-seated empathy of a man who had seen the pain of indifference and felt it as his own. The sadness in his eyes wasn't for what he had lost. It was for what the world was losing every single second in a million small, unthinking moments. It was the look of a man who understood the cosmic sorrow he had been shown, and had chosen to feel it with the universe instead of turning away from it. The last day of the interview, the journalist saw him in a moment that had nothing to do with the movie. They were on a break, and he saw a street musician, an old man with a guitar and a case open for donations, playing a beautiful, mournful melody. Most people walked by without a glance, lost in their own worlds. The actor stopped. He didn't just drop a bill in the case. He stood there and listened to the man play 3 entire songs. He watched the musician's fingers on the fretboard, his eyes closed in concentration. When the man finished, he walked over, crouched down, and spoke with him for several minutes. The journalist couldn't hear the words, but he could see the interaction. The old musician, who had looked tired and defeated, was now smiling, his face lit up with surprise and gratitude. The actor wasn't just giving him money. He was giving him his full attention, his respect, his acknowledgement. He was seeing him. He was fighting the apathy of the crowd with a single, simple act of connection. As he walked away, the musician started playing again, but this time the tune was brighter, more hopeful. The journalist put down his notebook. He knew he couldn't write the story he had come to write. The real story wasn't about a near-death experience or a divine revelation. The real story was about what a man does with such a truth. The truth that will blow your mind, the journalist now understood, wasn't a complicated secret. It was beautifully, devastatingly simple. God or the universe or whatever you want to call that great presence isn't angered by our mistakes in the way humans get angry. He is pained deeply and profoundly by our refusal to love. The habits that anger him are the ones that make us build walls around our hearts, that make us hoard our light, that make us turn away from each other. The actor's life had become a living testament to the opposite. He was a man who had touched the divine and returned not to preach about it, but to embody it. He showed the world that the most profound spiritual act is not a prayer spoken in a church, but a moment of genuine connection on a busy street. It is choosing to see the person everyone else ignores. It is using what you have to clear a path for someone else. It is letting the river of life flow through you instead of trying to dam it up for yourself. He was no longer the sad man on the bench. He was a quiet, steady flame in a world that desperately needed light, and his life had become the sermon.